so maybe we can start.
Yes.
So Kyle, please, with the opening remarks of this nice event on Crimea.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. Welcome to our seminar on Crimea, recognizing the 1944 genocide and confronting 11 years of Russian occupation. First, I would like to acknowledge the land in which I speak, the Darug people, the traditional owners of this land, and I'd like to pay respects to elders past and present, as I would also like to pay respects to the Maori of New Zealand and all Indigenous people today who preserve to maintain their cultural identity and lands. I would also like to pay respect to our Ukrainian guests and our Ukrainian heroes who now fight for freedom and liberation of their people and their native lands. I thank them for their unwavering bravery in sharing their history and story. We live in uncertain times. I have heard many say that this is the twilight of international law, that we perhaps are entering a dark age of the world order. But I reject this. If we are to abandon those who live under occupation, we abandon the very foundations of international law and justice. We would say that a criminal should be rewarded for their crime, and that the only thing that ever truly mattered for peace and security is whoever had the biggest gun. But we cannot allow fear to paralyze us, or to persuade us from the pursuit of justice, or to abandon our friends to the desires of past empires. And perhaps justice is far away for Ukraine, but I remain hopeful. I believe that this pathway to justice is a journey, not a destination. That each step that we take announces a better today and a brighter tomorrow. With that, I would like to introduce the ambassador to Australia of Ukraine for his opening remarks.
Hello. I cannot turn on the video, but I hope you can hear me. I think the administrator needs to unlock the video.
I can.
Yes, Kyle, please check it because we also have requests from another speaker. They cannot open the video.
Yeah, it's done by administrator.
You should be able to open it now.
Hold on. Yep, that's it. Yeah, thank you, Kyle. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people of Canberra, past, present, and the emerging. It's a very beautiful tradition, which I have learned in 3 years of my life here in Australia. And I think it's very special. And every time I talk about Indigenous people of Ukraine, I always refer to the experience of the Indigenous people of Australia and Aboriginal people of mainland and Torres Strait Islands, because I believe that's where our connection is. And every time I explain to what Russians did in Crimea, I always go back to the experience of the Aboriginal people in Australia. And I think this is when they can get a message across. So Carl, thank you very much for doing this lecture. I'm very pleased to open it up. Sorry, I'm now at a public venue at the National Art Gallery, where we just had, Assistant Defense Minister speaking at the major Defense and Security Conference, and it's dinner time here. But I want to tell you that you have some of the best speakers from Ukraine at the moment. Anton Koronevich, congratulations, just got appointed as the Chief of Legal of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And you have Alim Aliyev, Deputy Director of the Ukrainian Institute, which is a public diplomacy, cultural diplomacy outfit of Ukraine, which is part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He is Crimean Tatar himself. And they will give you probably, the best account of history and legal matters, what is related to the Crimean Tatars. But I have my own personal experience that I wanted to share with you briefly, because I think it's all about personal experiences. So my journey into learning about the Indigenous people of Ukraine and Crimean Tatars, Kirimli especially, comes down to my just personal friendship. When I was 19, no, I was actually 20, I went to a youth leadership forum in Munich, which was funded by the Bavarian government, people from all over the world, And there I met another Ukrainian who was there, and that was a Ukrainian from Crimea. And for me, it was quite extraordinary because he told me the story. He was born in Uzbekistan, and then he moved back, his family moved back to Crimea in 89, 90. So he graduated from high school in Crimea. But then he told me the whole story about 1944. He told me about, life in Uzbekistan, of his family. And this is when I guess, to be frank, that was the first time I learned about the Crimean Tatars. And that was quite extraordinary. I was surprised that already being a third-year student, I didn't know much about the history of the Crimean Tatars in Ukraine. Interestingly enough, that man who I met is currently Ukraine's defense minister, Rustem Umerov. And he's not only been a defense minister of a country at war, he's currently also leading Ukrainian negotiations with the Russians, which you've seen in Istanbul. Another round of those taking place, unfortunately, and not very successful, except for the exchange of the prisoners of war. But the reason why we're having this public lecture is because I think it's important to tell a story. It's important to tell a story and share the Ukrainian story of what Ukrainian Crimean Tatars currently are going through, having the leadership in Kiev, but not having access to Crimea, with the Majlis being banned, and their pretty much human rights and freedoms have been heavily restricted by the oppressive Russian government in Crimea. And of course, for me, it's also personal. Everything's personal, as we know. I used to go to Crimea every year, and every journey to Crimea was through, going through the Crimean Tatar history and kind of going through that experience, which unfortunately Russians have deprived every Ukrainian since 2014. Look, I would like to wish you a very good discussion. Make sure you ask questions. Anton and Alim can give you the best answers. And I'm sure you will learn a lot. I've been campaigning here in Australia to get it recognized as a genocide in Australia, but there is a problem here. I mean, Australian government refuses to recognize even the Holodomor as a genocide. It's part of their guidelines and kind of their principle and policy. It's only the things which have been recognized by an international court or any kind of court, they would look at it seriously. So we got motions in the Australian Parliament, recognizing Holodomor many times throughout the history, but it was never formal recognition on behalf of the Australian government. And they apply the same policy toward Armenian genocide. They applied the same policy toward Crimean Tatar genocide. And then, of course, we know all the debates around all of that. But this is just the reality of the actual Australian and New Zealand policy. They have a similar policy on this particular issue. I hope we'll be able to eventually overcome it. So I need, Kyle, your support as well as the support of other people, primarily on the Aboriginal side, to argue the case and make it and make it happen and make it help Australian government to understand more what Soviets did in 1944, what they're doing now in Ukraine and in Crimea, and how similar it is. So on that note, I would like to complete my remarks.
Thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time as well. And I hope you have a good art gallery showing.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I can't stay with you. I have to go back into the room. But
No
have a good one.
worries.
All right. Okay. Take care.
Have a great night. Thank you.
Okay. Bye. 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 Bye.
I would like to also introduce next my co-host, Alina, who has been there throughout my journey in discovering Crimea. Take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Kyle. Dear guests, it's my honor to speak at today's seminar on Crimea. As Kyle said, my name is Elina. I'm a Crimean Tatar manager of Ukrainian Crimean Tatar literary competition, Crimean FIG, and an activist. Kyle and I recently urged the Australian Parliament to recognize the Surgunluk, also known as 1944 deportation of Crimean Tatars, as genocide. This was vital because we so little know about Ukraine and even less about Crimea. Australia's deep understanding of the importance of preserving indigenous history and culture and an unwavering support of Ukraine makes it a crucial partner for us. We aim for the story of Crimean Tatar people to resonate personally with our Australian and international audience. Many of you may not know Crimean Tatars who are currently facing persecution in occupied Crimea, but their struggle is daily. International support for them is not just words, it's vital help. Your attention and solidarity will give hope and protection to those under the pressure of occupation. Today, we will not only delve into the history, but also discuss practical steps we can take to protect the international order and restore peace in Ukraine. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I hope you will have a productive time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who will talk about the history.
Yeah, but sorry, Kyle, I can introduce our speakers, and
Yep.
I also want to emphasize on some factors because, dear colleagues, dear friends, I'm absolutely happy that we have been able to gather here today, and thank you for your time and attention to Ukraine and its essential part, Crimea. And I really thank Ambassador of Ukraine, Mr. Vasyl Miroshnichenko, and his team, and thank you, Kyle and Elena, for the idea for organizing this event. And my name is Nelia. I work at the mission of the President of Ukraine in Crimea, and in particular, I am a part of the Crimean Platform Department, and it's my honor to introduce the speakers of today's event. So we have with us Alim Aliyev, Deputy Director of the Ukrainian Institute and co-founder of the Crimean Fig Literary Project, Suleiman Mamutov, who in 2022 was elected an expert member of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and in 2024, Suleiman was elected as rapporteur of the forum. And we also had to have today Olga Kurishko, permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, but unfortunately, due to an urgent meeting, still not able to join us. So on her behalf, I will talk about the current situation in Crimea. And also Anton Koronevich is on urgent business trip and will not be able to join us, unfortunately. But I hope we can have a productive meeting today. So I would like to pass the floor to Alim Aliyev, who will tell us more about the history of the Crimean Peninsula.
Hello, colleagues. It's a privilege to talk to you, and thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Elena, to organize this online event about Crimean Tatars. To be honest, I'm not a professional historian, but as the Crimean Tatars joked, each of us should be a historian to explain the history of Crimean Tatars and to break the one of the main Russian myths in this war about Crimea. The Crimea is a naturally ancient Russian land. That's why I will describe shortly about Crimean history, and also I will talk about a few dimensions of new colonization of Crimean Tatars. And yeah, I will start with affiliated to Crimean Tatars. As you know, we are indigenous people of Ukraine, and we are Eastern European Turkic people historically formed in the Crimean Peninsula. Crimean Tatars were formed as a people in Crimea and are descendants of various people and nations who lived in Crimea in different historical eras. The main ethnic groups that inhabited Crimea at various times and took part in formation of Crimean Tatars descendants of Tauri, Scythians, Sarmatians, Alans, Greeks, Goths, Bulgarians, Khazars, etc., etc., etc. But what's important to say is that the crucial role in this formation belongs to the Western Kipchaks, known in historiography as Kumans. The consolidation of this diverse ethnic conglomerate into a single Crimean Tatar people took place over the course of the centuries, of course. The connecting elements in this process were the commonality of the territory, the Turkic language, Crimean Tatars speaks the Crimean Tatar language, and Islamic religion. And for today, the Crimean Tatars are subdivided into three sub-ethnic groups. The first group, Tats, who used to inhabit in the mountains of Crimea, Yalobolu, who lived on the southern coast of the peninsula, and Noghais, former inhabitants of Crimean steppe. And what's important to say is that Crimean Tatars finally formed as a people during the Crimean Khanate times, independent state. The Khanate exists from 1441 till 1783. And the era of Crimean Khanate was a heyday of the Crimean Tatar culture, art, literature, and of course, Crimean Tatars had various social, political institutions, cultural institutions that established during the Crimean Khanate and that worked in Crimean during this Crimean Khanate. But what's important to say when we are talking about Crimea and how this related to current situation? Because when we are talking about the current situation in Crimea, we are talking about recolonization. Because the first attempt of colonization was in 1783 when Russian Empire and Catherine II annexed Crimean Peninsula and destroyed the Crimean Khanate. I just give you two numbers, two figures. Before this annexation, near 95% of all of population of Crimea were Crimean Tatars. Now it's dropped into 13–15% in Crimea. And that's why we should talk about the history and this broader historical context of the peninsula and Crimean Tatar history. And but I want to turn into 19th century, when Crimean Tatars' largest wave of forced migration from the peninsula began after the Russian Empire's defeat in the Crimean War, in and in 1856. The discrimination policy was reinforced. The Crimean Tatars were accused of supporting the Ottoman Empire and of betraying the Russian Empire. And we were deprived of our property, economically constrained, and even deported. In 1860s, thousands of Crimean Tatars were forced to leave their homes and belongings and move to Ottoman Empire. Many died during this forced resettlements. Many lost ties with their motherland. And since then, there have been more Crimean Tatars living abroad than on the peninsula. We name this period of our history Karasur, and in translation from Crimean Tatar language is Black Century. But the Crimean Tatar revival is closely connected to the name of prominent cultural figure of and educator, journalist, essayist, and cultural manager Ismail Gasparinsky. He made a great effort to the revival and survival of the Crimean Tatar people. He urged his compatriots not to leave Crimea. He used his newspaper Terjemon. By the way, it was the first Crimean Tatar newspaper at all. And to explain to the Crimean Tatars that they were a nation with the roots in the Crimean earth, a nation whose history was rich in ancient times. And the emphasis was placed on the fact that they were a secular nation possessing full right to their homeland. And this statement was important when we talk about Crimean Tatar history and when we're talking about this understanding and ties between Crimean Peninsula and its indigenous population. Next step is that important to about what we should to talk about. It's the beginning of 20th century. Crimean Tatars established Crimean National Republic. That state entity became the first democratic republic in the Muslim world, whose constitution granted equal rights to men and women. And we were if we were talking about sexual revolution in Europe, you know that it started in 60s in France. And it means that Crimean Tatars, this republic, gives these equal rights much more earlier. But however, the republic lasted only a few months. In early 1918, the Bolsheviks dissolved the Kurultai. As a Kurultai is a Crimean Tatar was the Crimean Tatar parliament, and now Kurultai, one of the Crimean Tatars representative bodies. And after this dissolved the Kurultai, they organized pogroms in Crimean Tatar villages and persecuted the local public figures and local intellectual figures. And in February, they arrested and executed the leaders of Crimean Tatars and the head of the Crimean National Republic, Nomanchely Bijihan, who also was a mufti. And after this, the Soviet Union, a repressive machine, was only gaining momentum. In the 1930s, Stalin's regime intensified the persecution of political oppositioners, intellectuals, cultural figures, historians, etc., etc., etc. But the main, of course, the main tragedy were in 1944, when the Soviet regime forcibly exiled all of the Crimean Tatar population from Crimea. And for us, it's a genocide. And not only for us as for Crimean Tatars, but Ukraine and few another states name is a genocide. I hope that Australia will also join for this process. And what's important to say also, the Crimean Tatars, we have the self-name of this genocide. We say the sürgünlük, yeah, what means the genocide of 1944. But in the second half of 1950s, the national movement for restoration of rights of Crimean Tatar people start to emerge in the areas of exile. And in 1989 was the first wave of returning of Crimean Tatars to the peninsula. And for today, near 500,000 of Crimean Tatars live in Crimea, but also in mainland in Crimea of Ukraine. And in 1991, during the when Ukraine gained its independence, the second Kurultai was called up, and the system of national self-government of the Crimean Tatars was established. Every 5 years, elections held for a new Kurultai national parliament, and Kurultai forms its executive body, the Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people. And for a long time, Mustafa Djemilov, prominent Soviet dissident, was the head of the Majlis, and now the Mustafa Djemilov, the leader of Crimean Tatar people. And since November 2013, Rifat Chubarov is his successor. But when we are talking about the temporary occupation of Crimea, I will talk very briefly and very short. We talk about, first of all, the replacement of the population. I talk about this replacement in 19th century, in 20th century, but we have the same situation now in Crimea, because more than 70,000 Crimean inhabitants left Crimea. It was a brain drain. Yeah, students, politicians, journalists, artists, young professionals, business persons, etc., moved into Kiev, into another part of Ukraine or abroad. But near 800,000 of new population came from Russia to Crimea. And in this way, Russia changed the ethnic and religion comparison of Crimea. But another dimension of new colonization is destroying Crimean Tatar identity through destroying Crimean Tatar tangible and intangible heritage. For example, Crimean Bakhchisarai Palace, Crimean Palace in Bakhchisarai is the most significant Crimean Tatar cultural architectural object, destroyed now under the guise of restoration. And Crimean Tatar language, for example, one of the endangered languages according to UNESCO list, also it's a huge problem to learn Crimean Tatar language in Crimea, but also to speak, because it's about public environment. That's why, as in Soviet times, Crimean Tatars organize private schools and private groups in their homes. And when we are talking, and that's why, for example, we organize here in Kiev the project with the name Crimea Fig, that gives the floor for authors, for novelists, for essayists, for translators, for poets to for their voices here publicly. Yeah, we are holding festival, we are organizing the contest, and also we are publishing as an anthology of contemporary Crimean Tatar fiction and poetry. And last but not least, it's about militarization of consciousness. Yeah, because today Crimea is one of the main platforms of launching the missiles to another cities and regions for Ukraine. But Russia forcibly militarize consciousness of students, of children in Crimea, and it's one of the as for me, it's one of the main issues because they militarize a new generation. And for us, as for Crimean Tatars, it's important to return to Crimea, of course, and to reestablish our national institutions as a Majlis of Crimean Tatar people that is a band now in Crimea, but also to bring to Crimea after the deoccupation Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar flag as in the form of national Crimean Tatar Republic in a frame of Ukraine state, of course. Thank you, colleagues, and sorry for such long this historical context, but I think it's important to understand deeply Crimea and its indigenous population. Thank you. One more.
I thank Kalim for telling these historical moments and emphasizing these facts. And I will continue to talk about the current situation in Crimea. But first, I would like to tell you about our institution. Maybe it will be interesting for your understanding and general overview. Before the occupation of Crimea in 2014, mission of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea was located in Simferopol, an administrative center of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And in 2014, the mission was relocated to Kherson, southern part of Ukraine. And in August 2021, the mission opened a national office of the Crimean Platform as its sub-office in Kyiv. And after the Russia full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, we have been fully operating in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. And in order to keep the issue of the liberation of Crimea on the global agenda, in 2021, President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, launched the International Crimea Platform. And the Crimea Platform is a key foreign policy tool for consolidation of international efforts aimed at the deoccupation of the Crimean Peninsula. And today I will provide also like a general overview of the situation in the occupied Crimea. And this information will help you to see and understand the continuity of the processes. Because after all, Russia's crimes didn't begin in 2014, and these crimes have been going on for centuries, and they were committed by the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. And nowadays, Russia continues these centuries-long colonial policies and practices. And since the cross-cutting topic of today's meeting is the issue of indigenous peoples, so let me start with this blog. The Crimea Peninsula is a homeland to the ethnic groups of Crimean Tatars, Karaites, and Krimchaks, who originated and developed in Crimea. As they don't have their own national states beyond Ukraine, Ukrainian state recognizes them as indigenous peoples of Ukraine. And from the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Empire in 1783, the indigenous Crimean Tatar people suffered a lot from the Russia colonial policies, which became even more cruel and genocidal in the 20th century with the forced deportation of nearly all Crimean Tatar population by the Soviet regime in 1944. And then in the 21st century, history repeats itself, unfortunately, because following Russia's 2014 invasion, Crimean Tatars again became targets of repression. For example, we can take an example of Crimean Tatar man Reshat Ametov, for example. He was the first civilian victim of the Russian occupation. In March 2014, he staged a lone peaceful protest in central Simferopol, and days later his tortured body was found. And he had been brutally beaten, his eyes gouged out, his mouth taped shut, and his murder was like a warning to anyone daring to oppose the occupation or speak the truth. And Russia propaganda claimed Crimea accept the invasion like peacefully and without resistance, but in reality, those who resisted were silenced permanently. For example, Reshat Ametov became the first victim of Russia terror. And then Russia's full-scale invasion became a test of endurance for all Ukrainians, especially those who had already endured occupation since 2014. Crimean Tatars are no exception. Russia launched a new wave of repression against them. Forced conscription drove many men and their families to flee the peninsula. And it is also interesting because on social media, comparison were even made between the events of 2022 and the 19th century, when Crimean Tatars were forced to leave due to conscription into the Russian Imperial Army. And after over 11 years of Russian occupation, the Crimean Peninsula has been turned into a military base and like a prison for its residents. And since 2014, human rights have been systematically violated. Independent media don't exist, religious freedoms are suppressed, and so on. And the repression escalated after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. And today, Russia illegally holds 222 Crimean political prisoners. 132 of them are Crimean Tatars. And the actual number is likely much higher, as many cases are partially or entirely cancelled due to Russian control over information. And also independent international and national human rights organizations regularly report cases of forced disappearance, torture, illegal arrest, and searches. And Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians are subjected to systematic persecution, with indigenous Crimean Tatar people being the main target. I just want to mention that Orthodox Church of Ukraine has been destroyed in Crimea, and as Elim said, Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people, which is a representative body of the Crimean Tatars, is banned by the Russian authorities as an extremism organization, and its leaders are criminally prosecuted. Those with views that support Ukraine to any extent face illegal searches, arrest, and torture. And after the full-scale invasion in 2022, Russia has introduced additional articles to its administrative and criminal codes for the so-called discreditation of the Russian army, and has been actively applying this article against Ukrainian citizens in Crimea. And the goal of this article actually is very clear. It's to silence everyone who resists the occupation, who post on social media some messages or post in support of the Ukrainian armed forces, or who openly condemns the Russian military. And to date, around 1,300 such cases have been recorded. One documented case involved a woman fined because her 10-year-old daughter posted a video in TikTok in support of Ukraine. And the number of such cases in Crimea has been steadily increasing over the year, while within Russia this number is declining. And this shows one thing, that Crimea is resisting and will never become like a legitimate part of Russia. I also want to mention that alongside the human rights violations, the Russia are systematically erasing Crimean identity and cultural. The Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union, as we see, tried to destroy Crimea's authentic heritage by demolishing mosques, caravanserais, and Khanate-era landmarks, renaming places, and disfiguring the peninsula architecture. And today, Russia officials build lavish palaces along Crimea southern shore to serve as new symbols of the region, continuing the legacy of looting cultural heritage. And since 2014, Russia's occupying administration has looted museum collection, conducted illegal archaeological digs, and plundered private and academic libraries and archives. They even destroy such iconic Crimean Tatar landmarks as a Khan Palace in Bakhchisarai and construction of the Taurida Highway, unthreatened numerous historical artifacts, the fate of which remains unknown, unfortunately. And Crimea's cultural heritage is also suffering under militarization, including, for example, Orkapey fortress, which is now entangled in military fortification. And another blow is the illegal excavation at Taurik Chersonesus. It's one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and since 2014, artifacts have been unlawfully removed and transported to Russia. And what conclusion should we all draw today after this lecture? What we must take away, that we have all seen how the silence surrounding past crimes has led to their repetition, unfortunately. That is why Ukraine emphasized that today the Russian Federation, heir to both the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, is once again employing the old new tactic of repressing Ukraine's indigenous people who historically formed on the Crimean Peninsula. And the name for this imperial know-how is quiet deportation. And despite politically motivated persecution and the constant threat to their lives, Ukrainian citizens in Crimea, including Crimean Tatars, remain steadfast in their position. Crimea is Ukraine. And supporting those living under occupation and doing everything possible for those illegally imprisoned by the Russians is our collective duty, actually, because if each of us, whenever we are, can contribute to that effort. For example, to that end, the mission, together with human rights organization and another institution, launched the initiative which calls Letters to Free Crimea. This initiative allows everyone to write a letter of support to political prisoners, and this letter sends a vital message that you are not forgotten and we are fighting for your freedom. And also in 2021, Ukraine's Foreign Affairs Ministry launched a mentorship program for political prisoners, including citizen journalists. I also want to draw your attention that the European Court of Human Rights June 2024 ruling in Ukraine versus Russia regarding Crimea was especially significant, holding Russia accountable for systematic human rights violation in Crimea. And also the UN General Assembly and the European Parliament have repeatedly reported on these abuses. And in May 2025, the European Parliament adopted a resolution demanding the return of Ukrainian children forcibly transferred and deported by Russia. And the fight for Crimea continues. It's also one of facts that I want to highlight today, because many indigenous Crimean Tatars, soldiers, and veterans are now on the front line. defending Ukraine's sovereignty, and nearly every Crimean Tatar soldiers fighting today descends from families deported in 1944. And we must, it's like a general recommendation for each of us who are today presented on this lecture, this seminar, that we must study history, learn to analyze, and most importantly, draw conclusions so that the crimes of the past are never repeated, because justice, especially historical justice, is essential. And that is why on May 18, Ukraine commemorates the victim of the Crimean Tatar genocide. Many countries recognized this 1944 deportation as an act of genocide. For example, parliaments in Latvia and Lithuania, Canada, as well as Poland, Estonia, and Czech Republic have adopted resolution recognizing the Soviet regime's action against the Crimean Tatar people as genocide. And we really today call on parliaments of foreign states, including Australia, to recognize this crime of deportation as an act of genocide. So thank you for your attention, and I'm glad to pass the floor to the next speaker, Suleiman Mamutov.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Can you hear me?
Yes, all right.
Thanks. So, dear colleagues, everyone who is present today, first I would like to thank the organizers of this event and for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here with you today. My name is Suleiman Mamutov. I'm an expert in international law, international humanitarian law, and the rights of indigenous peoples, with more than 10 years of experience working in international organizations, including the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where I had, by the way, the privilege of cooperating and working together with a remarkable human rights advocate, Dr. Hannah McGlade, who is Indigenous Australian academic lawyer and human rights defender. I come from a Crimean Tatar family. While I was not born in Crimea due to reasons beyond my control and reasons tied to historical injustices that we'll discuss today and that we had already started discussing, Crimea remains my homeland, and this story is part of who I am. My family's experience is not unique among Crimean Tatars. It reflects a broader collective memory of exile, survival, and resilience. So this is why I think part of my speech would not be only about legal or historical analysis, but also about personal reflection on a people's struggle to exist and to be recognized. In our case, to be recognized as indigenous people that was formed and that want to continue to live in Crimea. The 1944 deportation was a clear act of genocide because it was an attempt to destroy an indigenous people by removing not just their bodies, but their presence from history, from memory, and from the land of itself, from memory of Crimea in general. As was already mentioned by previous distinguished speakers, the Crimean Tatars are the indigenous peoples of Ukraine formed in the Crimean Peninsula. They possess a distinct language, historical memory, vibrant culture, traditions. We have aspirations, we have our own goals. And of course, all of this is deeply connected to our land. So for us, Crimea is not just a geographic place. It is the cradle of our identity. The violence of 1944, which is also a significant point, started not on May 18, 1944. It began actually with colonization, and Alim had already mentioned this. So in the late 18th century, Russia annexed Crimea and dismantled our state, Crimean Khanate. This marked the beginning of a long history and campaign of displacement and domination, which is very similar to other colonial conquests, specifically by European states globally, in Latin America, in Africa, and maybe to some extent in Pacific region. In the 19th century, mass migration intensified and Crimean Tatars fled en masse outside Crimea. First, due to fears of religious persecution, start of forced conscription, and the most important, in my view, is due to the systematic land dispossession. And by the 20th century, we had also histories of but after the Soviet regime arrived, we also faced a history of famine and targeted executions of intellectuals in the 1930s, just several years before the deportation took place, and collective punishment. So on May 18, 1944, Soviet authorities forcibly deported the entire Crimean Tatar people. And in a few days, all of them were loaded into sealed cattle wagons. Significant part and a significant point I'd like to stress is that mostly those who were deported, forcibly deported, were women, children, and the elderly. Thousands and tens of thousands died en route to Central Asia due to inhumane conditions. Survivors faced starvation, disease, and forced labor. And this is why it was not merely a mass deportation, a movement of one group of people from one place to another. It was actually a genocide. And let me explain why. Because the definition of genocide was codified in international law in 1948 in the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And as a war crime, it includes the following elements. It's killing members of a group. It's causing serious bodily or mental harm and deliberately inflicting conditions calculated to destroy the group in whole or in part, and imposing measures to prevent births. The last element of genocide as a crime is, or one of its manifestations could be forced transferring of children of one group to another group. And it is not necessary for all these elements to be present, just one, with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And I believe that the deportation of Crimean Tatars meets this criteria. There was a clear intent. The deportation was planned. It was documented. Several days or maybe 1 or 2 weeks before the deportation, Soviet authorities counted property and individuals. And This is why the order of deportation that came from Moscow was executed rapidly. So it was something that was planned, which refers us directly to the existence of this intent. It was a deliberate distraction because these conditions during the deportation, they were designed, they were the very the practice and the experience witnesses claim that all these conditions they were from the outset, they were designed in a way to be lethal, to bring as more harm as possible, because at least 20% died according to official figures, and we know that statistics was something that Soviet Union could manipulate easily when it wanted, whether to reduce something or exaggerate figures based on the political need. According to estimates of Crimean Tatar National Movement for Return, this figure of those who died in the process or after, due to the consequences of deportation, we suggest that it is around 46%. And there was a clear intent to inflict mental and physical harm, trauma, malnutrition, untreated illness, which caused long-term generational harm. Very important element of this crime was erasure of identities, destruction of identity. Our toponyms, name of settlements, villages, cities were changed. There were closure of schools. By the way, officially, more than 1,444 names were changed of localities among Crimea were changed after the deportation. Its closure of schools, its closure of libraries, banning of return of those who tried to do so, which was aimed at to restrict people from their land and memory, and in general to remove this to remove any memory about these people at their homeland. One more important element of 1944 deportation is that this crime did not end in May 1944. The Crimean Tatars were subjected to decades of forced settlement in exile. And until 1956, they were not allowed to leave their assigned areas. In order to visit your relative in a neighboring village, you had to apply for you had to apply for a permit by Soviet authorities, by local authorities. And they often lived without access to basic rights. There was no, as I mentioned, there was no free movement, no education in our language, no restitution, no justice. Of course, you can forget about justice. And what is often forgotten is the psychological genocide. The trauma imposed on children, on women and families, because generations were raised in the fear, exile, and silence, and many could not, all of them could not return to homeland for decades. Many never did. So even today, these scars remain. Why recognition matters? Recognizing the deportation of Crimean Tatars as genocide is not just a symbolic act. It is a moral, it's a legal and a preventive necessity, because we all know that impunity leads to repetition of crimes, and we see this even today. Here is an interesting idea. I'm not telling you that this is something that is where we can find perhaps some agreement on this, but my personal view is that the problem with the recognition, of course, is that Soviet Union was never held accountable for this crime and for many other war crimes it committed during the World War II. This failure enabled new crimes, and this also moved to the modern and up to our days. In 2014, Russia, you can see once again, occupied Crimea. Crimean Tatars still recovering and rebuilding. They were vulnerable at that time. And we often speak about justice as a legal process, but in the case of 1944 Surgunik, I think that the path to formal legal, and I mean legal through tribunals, for example, recognition, it has been logged by history. The deportation of Crimean Tatars was a grave war crime. Let me be crystal clear here. But in my view, the problem and challenge is that evidence of this war crime, much of it is inaccessible. It has been either destroyed or classified or remain under lock in Moscow's archives. And this has created an absurd dynamic. As victims, we bear the burden for the lack of access to evidence, as if this is our failure, when in fact it reflects the structural impunity of perpetrator. Legally, this crime, in my view, should have been brought to light after World War II at the Nuremberg Tribunal. But USSR, as we all know, while itself was a perpetrator and a responsible actor for many war crimes, many mass atrocities, USSR stood among victors, and so its own crimes were excluded. And this is not only about the deportation of Crimean Tatars. I can bring the example of aggression against Poland, the occupation and reoccupation of the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, the invasion of Finland in 1939. And of course, one of these is the genocidal deportation of Crimean Tatars, among many other things. So we must acknowledge this historical injustice. The impunity of the USSR, it was built into the post-war order. And by the way, the impunity of Russian Federation in the modern world was also built into this post-war order, where the very design of this order allowed the Russian Federation to continue to use its veto power at the Security Council, UN Security Council, and thus block many initiatives. So can we now build a new tribunal to review these crimes, including Surgunik, retroactively? Realistically, I think we cannot. But there is another way, through political recognition. Governments, parliaments, international institutions can and should, I believe, recognize the Surgunik of 1944 as genocide, not only to honor the truth, but to send a message to the successor of the Soviet state, the Russian Federation, that we remember. It would be a powerful signal. We remember, and we reject impunity. We reject all forms of impunity, whether it was in the past, in the present, or in the future. And for future, we already I congratulate Ukraine and all of us with the establishment of this tribunal for the war for the crimes of aggression by Russian Federation within the framework of Council of Europe. Because we all know that impunity, again, feeds recurrence. We have seen this again, occupation of 2014, previous aggression of Russian Federation is a clear example of how impunity leads to the wide-scale new violations and war crimes. So yeah, this is why recognition matters. At the political level, it is very significant. And I, as a citizen of Ukraine, I thank the Australian House and the Parliament for recognizing Holodomor as a genocide in 2008. It was really strong and very relevant and timely. It is never late. It was timely signal and support to Ukrainian state. And it will be the same for Crimean Tatars if Australia recognizes at one point of time 1944 Surgunik as a genocide. So yes, it was a genocide. When people is targeted for destruction physically, culturally, psychologically, when the aim is to make them cease to exist as people, which was a clear intent of the Soviet Union, all the dimensions of our life as indigenous people was targeted, was attacked with a clear intent to erase us. What more do we need to prove that this was a genocide? And to prevent future atrocities, we must confront past ones. This is what history teaches us about. Thank you so much. Sorry also for such a long story and explanation. I'll be I will be very thankful for your questions.
Thank you, Solon. I wholeheartedly agree. And I want to springboard off something that you said, which was kind of the difficulties with recognizing genocide. This emphasis is placed on the victims. And I think that has to do with the special intent element or requirement of genocide. We're seeing it in the modern world, particularly for Australians in the case of the stolen generation, that there needs to be this clear intent of genocide. Where this becomes difficult is, as you have said, that all the evidence that we could use to prove it is in lock and key in Moscow, or it's burned, or it's just lied about. That has been the nature of Russia and has been in the nature of the USSR. So I think we need to begin to decolonize our understanding of genocide and kind of challenge this burden of proof on the victims.
Thank you.
I'd also like to ask Nelia to take the floor and
Yeah, I just can add more about what is Ukraine doing for Crimea now. Maybe it will be interesting for your understanding also, because despite unstable military and political conditions, Crimea will be liberated, and the mission is working upon their integration strategies now, so that the Ukrainian state will be prepared when the deoccupation finally happens, and it will be complex and challenging to get Crimea back to normal life within Ukraine, and it requires a careful preparation and implementation of certain economic, administrative, legislative, and social measures. And for example, mission together with governmental and non-governmental partners, the Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people, and other partners came up with several strategic documents. For example, it is strategy of the economic restoration of Crimea, strategy of the first steps of Ukrainian state after the occupation, because reintegration means multiple things like restoration of Ukrainian authorities in Crimea, some moments, some issues with accountability, economic restoration, and transformation, property rights, etc. And we already have a vision on all this issue. And the strategy of the economic restoration of Crimea stipulates the modernization of infrastructure, development of tourism, agriculture, and environmentally friendly power generation. And also there is some issue with promoting culture of the indigenous people of Ukraine. And also we have already developed several documents based on the international law, which cover the most pressing issue, for instance, the issue of citizenship and how we are going to deal with about 1 million of Russia new-coming settlers that illegally came to Crimea after the beginning of the occupation, and how to resolve the issue with private property and so on. And the Ukrainian parliament has also adopted several related laws regarding some issues. And it's like a general overview of about what is Ukraine doing for Crimea now under the occupation. And yeah, I thank you for your attention. Maybe there is some question.
If you want to ask a question, write it in chat and we can begin the Q&A discussion section. Also, I think something important to mention is that Crimea is the hub for the deportation of children from occupied areas. It's, I believe, 20,000 children are currently being stolen from Ukraine.
So if there is no question, maybe we can close our meeting. So I just want to say thank you, Kyle, Elena, our participants, Ambassador and his team. I also want to say thank you to Suleiman Mamutov and Ali Maliyev for joining us today and to emphasize these important facts for our audience.
I do have a few words to say afterwards. That's some closing remarks. I want to emphasize the crucial point that Suleiman already mentioned, that Crimea is not merely a piece of land, dot on the map, or geopolitical pawn. It's living people. And when talking about Crimea, we have to remember that we are talking about nearly 500,000 of Crimean Tatars on their historical homeland. And the recognition of importance is showing that the world remembers and the world condemns this crime because each of them, including those who have personally endured this experience, like my grandmother, or I'm sure grandparents of Suleiman and Alim, they experienced the tragedy of Cyrillic, and it still feels like a deep pain today, even in us, like their grandchildren. So we hope that our international partners will fix this historical injustice because, as Suleiman said, the crimes that have not been condemned tend to repeat themselves. And for us, Crimea is home, as it is home for Crimean Tatars, and we will continue to fight for it to return home and to restore the justice, because we simply do not have other place we can call our homeland. Ukraine is our country, but Crimea is our historical homeland, and we are connected to it significantly. So I call once again for the Parliament of Australia and New Zealand to recognize Cyrillic as genocide, and I urge all the participants, not only from Australia and New Zealand, to send to your parliament similar letters with appeal and urge to recognize the deportation of 1944 as genocide, because your countries have to see your concern to have make such recognition, because they have to understand that this is your values, that you support Crimean Tatars, so it will be easier for them to have such a decision. So thank you for joining and your solidarity, and I hope that we will carry the knowledge and resolve from this seminar forward into concrete actions.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank all our speakers taking the time to come and teach us such important history. I'm joyed at being able to hear the stories of so many people. I think we need to listen more to Ukrainians when we come to any issue of Ukraine. So often is it that America and the rest of the West is shouting over the voices of the very people that are affected. So I think everyone, we need to listen more, learn more, and continue this journey of justice because each of us owes a debt to one another because we are all human. And Slava Ukraine.
And hello, Australia, and thank you so much for your country to great support of Ukraine.
We do have one question, I believe.
Will you please read it out loud?
Thanks to the organizer and speakers for this enlightening seminar. The Crimean Tatar cause, like that of Ukraine more generally, must be brought at all opportunities into public view. We definitely agree. Thank you for this very informative discussion. My full solidarity goes to Crimean Tatars and people of Ukraine. Alan writes, thank you all for your contribution. Elena says, thank you very much. Anna says, thank you very much for organizing this seminar. We all live with a hope of Ukrainian Crimea. And then Elena says, thank you everyone so much for bringing this session. For this session and bringing everyone to attention to Crimean history. The speaker mentioned several times the connection of the history of the famine of 1932 and 33. The Holodomor and the Crimean Tatars were also impacted by this famine. As Dr. Martin's research illustrates, this is indeed about solidarity between Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars. I wonder if anyone could speak on the growing solidarity between Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars.
Someone, do you want to have a word?
I will be brief. I think this is something natural and yeah, when you have some trauma or pain that is still wounded, and when you have some common aims, either individual or collective, this all leads this cannot lead us to any other way than to solidarity. And I remember or recall the words of well-known Ukrainian thinker and one of the thought leaders, Yevgen Glibovitsky, that Crimea cannot be Ukrainian if it is not a Crimean Tatar land, and it cannot be a Crimean Tatar land if it's not a part of Ukraine. So yeah, I think it explains to much extent our solidarity. Not only since 2014, it's something that was brewing and growing for many years. Before Ukraine reclaimed its independence in 1991, we have a quite long story of solidarity that has its roots in centuries before, and I hope that it will only evolve throughout the years and decades to come. Thank you.
I would like to add here that throughout the centuries, Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars had a mutual enemy, which was Russian Empire and then Soviet Union, and these days is the Russian Federation. And yeah, during back in Crimean Khanate times, it was still relevant. Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars had strong ties. And that famine that Irina mentioned, the Holodomor, was also wasn't the only famine our peoples have endured, because, for example, in 1920s, there was another famine in Crimea organized by the Soviet Union. It was once again a deliberate act of destruction of Crimean Tatar people. And during when Crimean Tatars founded their country in 1917, as Ali Maliyev said, they sent a delegation of diplomats to Kiev, to Ukrainian People Republic, to have these ties with the Ukrainian people. So it has been with us through centuries, not only after 1991, as well as the Soviet Union. Ukrainian dissidents and Crimean Tatar dissidents had very strong connection. So it is natural for us, and it's not only about land, but about our values and our goals, as our speaker has mentioned.
I think it's a very important topic to talk about why justice can't be found under a Russian authority. I know, for instance, that in order to be classified as indigenous in Russia, you have to have a population of around below 50,000, and you have to engage in traditional practices. You have to live traditionally, which for everyone in Australia, I think we understand our own laws around native land title, where we need them to prove that they have a connection to the land and it's uninterrupted, and that they engage in historical practices. While ours isn't as strict, it's important to highlight that it's hard to have human rights when the only way you can be indigenous is when you're a incredibly dispowered group. So I again emphasize that the only way forward for Crimea to regain justice and human rights is through deoccupation. I know recently, and I can say thankfully, I see some progress being made in the international courts with the Ukraine fact-finding mission. So I'm hopeful that Australia and other countries will invest resources into helping Ukraine investigate war crimes, rebuild, and return to, a sense of normality and a brighter future.
Most important is to support us with the recognition, because international support is the main thing for us to rely on. Because when we have that international attention and support, it gives a signal to Russia that the world is watching.
Yes, so I'm hopeful that our letters will make an impact. I implore everyone else to, when they talk about Ukraine, talk about Crimea. I hope this has been informative. I could also recommend follow the Crimean Platform and various NGOs in the region. I know the Crimean Human Rights Group documents people who have engaged in human rights violations. I think accountability is very important when it comes to these type of crimes. I would also recommend there's a documentary recently. I'll need Alina to repeat the name of that one.
I think it's Untold Story of Crimean Tatars by Ukrainian Project.
It's a good video. It's a good video for someone who doesn't know much and wants to kind of have a basic understanding. So I think it's a very good tool, and it's in English. It's a very good tool to introduce it to students and people who may be uninformed about it, because I think it's important that we tell these stories and we illuminate these stories beyond the reach of just Ukraine. We make it global.
Okay. Thank you everyone for coming, and once again for your solidarity and support.
The video
Yeah,
will
we
be.
really appreciate your time and that you are here with us today. All of you, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day in Ukraine.
Thank you. Have a good night in Australia.
Good night.
Good night. Bye. Thank you again.